This
administrator.
conference will now be recorded.
Oh, we're starting the recording. Wonderful. And now I'm in private practice, and I recently, in the last few weeks, left my counseling group to open up a counseling center specifically for teenagers, and we're converting our old antique home into this place. So we're it's crazy, but it's all very exciting and all that good stuff. So this is just by way of context and talking about the coronavirus, and it's just been on my heart lately. I really prayed about whether or not to share this, because I know this hits so close to home for you, and I'm sure those of you who are looking at this, you very well recognize this scene from September 11th, 2001. One could argue that millions of people around the world on that day and in the days after saw the this exact same wreckage, this tragedy on screens around the world. People looked at it. And yet there was one guy, this Italian construction worker, this iron worker, Frank Selecchia, that saw something amidst all of that wreckage that no one else, millions and millions of people saw. And it was the cross. He saw these two perfectly symmetrical I-beams in the shape of a cross laying amidst all of the wreckage. And as you probably know better than I do, that cross has been named a few different things. The 9/11 cross, I think now it's currently named the Heroes Cross, and it is at the 9/11 Memorial. It's made several tours around the world. Rudy Giuliani, about a week after the towers collapsed, said that regardless of religion, regardless of creed, people found that this cross, this Christian symbol, proved to be a sign of hope for everyone during those times. And I'm sure obviously it wasn't every single person, but it was very clear that this cross that they unearthed from the wreckage was a symbol of hope, and that we're going to get through it. And it gave them courage to be able to continue on. There's Frank standing with the new head of the Franciscan friary. And there's the Heroes Cross there at the memorial. I would argue one of the most difficult things in all of Christianity to do is to recognize the cross when it shows up in our life. I am a recovering seminarian from the years 1994 to 2000. I was in the seminary, and I'm still recovering. And I remember those wonderful, very romantic days of seminary. And it's as I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, how did that ever prepare me for like real ministry? Because it was so easy and so romantic. I mean, I looked out the window and I saw the St. Peter's Basilica. Literally, I could walk to St. Peter's Basilica from my seminary in the Vatican. And I remember the cross in my mind was me and Jesus walking along the shore of Galilee in flowing robes, and Enya was playing in the background, and it felt all very sexy and spiritual and heroic. And I realized at 46 that wasn't. I realized a lot sooner than now, but that was my ego and 100%, and not the cross. The cross rarely looks like the cross. The cross almost always looks irrelevant. It almost always looks arbitrary. It looks senseless. It looks devoid of meaning. It looks like it has nothing to do with the passive or active will of God. The cross rarely shows up and announces itself to us and goes, hey, I'm your cross. It doesn't feel like the cross. And one of the things that I find coming up in my themes, especially, and I don't just work with Christian Catholic teenagers, I work with young people from all denominations, but it's being able to help them, the ones who are Christian. It's so easy to be able to say, hey, I know that this sucks. in the last, since the beginning of this year, 2020, so much of it is said, but this is the cross. All that stuff we've talked about in church and on Sunday, all of our lives, all of the masses, all of the rosaries, all of our devotions, all of our religious talk, all of the conferences that we go to, all of the webinars that we've gone to have been in an attempt to prepare us for this moment. Not just this moment, but various moments in our lives. But this is a moment. This is the cross. And it didn't feel like, we don't know when it's going to end. As a wise priest told me one time, he goes, there's no light when you're in the tomb. It's all darkness when you're in the tomb, right? Resurrection doesn't appear like it's going to be resurrection until it's resurrection. Until then, it's all Calvary. And right now, on so many levels, we as parents, as ministers, as people who care about young people, as people who care about each other, right? It's so imperative to recognize that this is the cross. When you woke up today and there was a part of it that didn't change and you wanted it to get back to normal, that's the cross. When you wake up tomorrow and there's an element of your day that sucks because of COVID-19 or because of the incivility and the racial tension that's in our country, that's the cross. That's the cross. And we claim it, we seek it out, we prepare for it every Lent. And yet all of us, right? When it comes into our lives, it makes cowards of us all. I know, myself included. I'm like, I know this is the cross, but I just want it to be over, damn it. Can it just change? Can't we just get back to normal? That's our challenge. And for young people especially, a lot of times, if we're not careful, we can, those of you who are kind of type A like me, I love it when things go linear and the keynote slides help me. I am not a natural linear thinker. I think very cyclical and I think very tangentially, which makes me a very entertaining speaker at times, but it can also make me a pain in the derriere. And some of you might need some Advil and a leave and migraine by the time we're done with this webinar, but I'll be on track. But we don't grow in this linear fashion. That would be nice, right? But we really grow like this. And if for young people especially, you throw executive functioning issues into the mix, ADHD, you throw mood disorders, anxiety, and it's really way off the page, these little cycles. Now, that looks great, right? Psychologists have been talking about this sort of developmental loop for years. We all go through this loop. Young people will go through it every year until they're about 14, 13, and then they'll go through it every 2 years until they're about 23 or 24. And then they will cycle every 7 years. And it's where we get the 7-year itch from. That one part of our life, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, career-wise, ministerially, relationally, couples will go through that about every 7 years. And it's kind of built in. Usually in the first 3 to 7 years, they have kids. And then that's the big loop of the cycle. And then those kids become teenagers about 7 years later. And it's special. And yet, each one of those loops is not just psychology. It's not just built in. It's not mere secular humanism. It's the Paschal mystery. It's the suffering, death, and the resurrection and mastery of Christ. And mastery feels so good, right? If you've ever been in love, I remember when I first fell in love with my wife, Mindy. Oh my God, I was so hopelessly infatuated with that woman. I still kind of am, to be honest, but I was so over the top that I bought a pack of gum at the store and paid with $100 bill, and I completely forgot the change. And the guy's like, hey, you got $99 here. I was like, it doesn't matter. She loves me. Oh, it was just beautiful. Oh God, it's just like constant dopamine and vasopressin and serotonin in the brain. It was beautiful. And then all of a sudden you're getting married and you learn that your bride has flatulence. And it's like, oh my God, you said you didn't do that. And that's disintegration, right? The honeymoon begins to end. Really, in all seriousness, that happens when kids come along. And this is really the psychology behind the Catholic Church's teaching around contraception, that we really If we were salesmen as Catholics, we would all be unemployed and poor because we do such a poor job of it. We just go do it because we told you to do it, damn it. But instead of saying, because what happens in a relationship when the couple is looking here, I go on my tangential stuff again. When the couple is like navel gazing at each other like that, they can hold that for about 3 to 6 years. And if they don't stop navel gazing at each other and look outward, right, this relationship will implode. It cannot hold the love, and it has to move outward. And child rearing, right, and child and birth and bringing new life is the natural way for them to look outward. And if for couples who can't have kids and who choose not to adopt and their relationship succeeds, it's because they've usually found something that their relationship can pour that life into. It's not about a condom. It's about brilliant Christian psychology that it has to go outward. And so they begin the disintegration process, right? Young people in March, probably for young parents in February, March, and you guys certainly got it earlier than we did with COVID. I'm looking at my screen to my left. I just want you to know I'm not waving at the neighbor. Mastery. For parents, we started in March. Young people, I don't really think they started disintegrating until about May, late April, May. For seniors, when it started becoming clear that they weren't going to have a graduation ceremony, I mean, it was a party for most teens for a while. Like they just got to be home. They didn't have to go to school. My business suffered because the level of stress in young people that school exudes and the busyness exudes just wasn't there. And especially for the social anxiety disorder kids, they thought they were healed. They just went into hibernation. And they're coming out of hibernation right now. So they disintegrate, and they're in that disintegration process. We as parents and ministers are also in that disintegration process. And what that says is that I don't have the knowledge, the tools, the wisdom, or the experience to be able to deal with and meet the current demands that life is placing upon me. And so I fall apart. And it begins, what we want to see is a process of acquiring new skills, new knowledge, new abilities, new experiences, and new wisdom to be able to meet life. And then we reintegrate and go into mastery again. It's interesting because most professions, people don't start at mastery, but especially ministers and teachers. They start off in disintegration, and it usually gets fueled with a lot of alcohol in the first 3 years. And usually round about year 3, teachers start to go, oh my God, okay, I can do this. I don't want to kill the kids, and I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have to drink for breakfast. Like, this is going to be okay. And it finally starts to come together, and you're like, he really likes alcohol. I don't. That's okay. So that's what's happening in all of us right now. And that is that it's easy to recognize the Paschal mystery during Lent and Easter and the Triduum. It's much more difficult and it's easy to recognize it in other people's lives. It's very, very challenging, and it is a spiritual gift to be able to recognize it when the transformation is occurring in our life. So what are just some of the challenges that parents and young people are facing right now? Certainly personal challenges. Connecting. Now, here's what's so unique about this. This is always true, but it's especially true right now. There are people, believe it or not, for whom this whole life change of COVID has been a big warm bubble bath of water. Like, they've done really well and they've enjoyed it, and they never want things to go back to normal. They like the new normal, right? Even more so, all of these challenges aren't being faced by every teen and by every family. Some of them are facing all of them. Some of them are facing only a few. And the level of intensity with which they are experiencing these challenges are different. So personal. A lot of teens love to connect digitally. In fact, I've got a lot of boys who I know, not just ones in my practice, but who prefer to connect. I mean, their main friend group, they've never actually met in person. Now, we can, notwithstanding, have a conversation about how healthy that is. But extroverts and people who really feel and experience love through physical proximity, of which I am one of those people, That's an interesting thing. Like some people have to be proximal to other people in order to experience love for them, which is why long distance relationships can work for some people and they just are abysmal for other people. I would be one of those people for whom long distance relationships doesn't work. My wife, like last night, we were just sitting down on the couch, and she goes, "Oh, I got to go to Bible study," and I was like, "Oh, where are you going?" And Bible study, I was like, "Oh, you didn't tell me that," and I got all butthurt, and and she's going to like talk about God and all this wonderful stuff, but and she's like, "We weren't visiting anyway." But this has happened 1,000 times in the last 20 years of our marriage. I was like, "I know, but when you're here, I feel loved. Like I feel like we don't need to talk. I just want you here." And for a lot of young people, a lot of parents, right, experience that as well. There's lots of conflict, right? Not just with COVID, but with all of the other, in Cajun French we say tracas, which means crap, that's going on in the world today, the racial tensions, the injustice, and especially for adults, all of your friends who you thought you were in 90% agreement with, and they post every single controversial opinion they have online, and now you're like, I don't know if I ever want to talk to you again. I'm not sure if I could look at you in the eye. We see incivility, just the level of discourse, relational strain, trauma, and we're going to talk much more about trauma. Uncertainty is probably the biggest one, and we're still there. We are still uncertain, and we're not even sure how long this level of uncertainty is going to go on. We've experienced massive cultural, economic, social. For many of us, I put on the COVID-19, 19 pounds. I know that's why they call it COVID-19. Physical changes. The virtual world, for people who had to work virtually, for some people that came naturally, for some people it came, for some people it's still a fight. That's the cross, by the way. And here's the key. Here's the biggest one, and this is also big for young people, but it's big for all of us, and it's not what we talk about at cocktail parties. It's not what we talk about. It's usually not even what we talk about in ministry gatherings. But what does all this mean? We as God's human beings, God's creatures, we are hardwired for meaning, right? Some of us, you get some people who err on the side of being more superstitious, but we're always asking, what does this mean? What does it mean that the world has changed as much as it is? People who are a little more apocalyptic think it's signs of the end times. What does it mean? Well, and for some, it just means that things are going to be really, really different, and they're going to suck for a while. My grandparents made it through the Great Depression. Maybe it's just an extended version of how the world changed after 9/11. But we're hardwired for meaning. And that, my brothers and sisters, is the biggest and most unique gift that we as religious people, people of faith, have to offer young people. Because we've got meaning. We know the meaning in it, and that meaning is hanging on two pieces of wood in every church in the world, right? And it's the cross, it's the crucifix, and it's the resurrection. It's that this has meaning. We don't know what it's as sucky as it is. We don't know what good will come from this, but we trust that good will come from it, even if we don't consciously recognize it for a while. And church issues don't go away. The sexual abuse scandal, diocese is going bankrupt, all sorts of mismanagement issues in the church, that's still going on. More specifically, challenges around commencements, not just for seniors, but for college students. Actually, most college students I know usually don't want to go. They're usually too hungover to go to their graduation, and just would rather get it mailed in. But high school students want to graduate, 8th graders or 7th graders at whichever grade they go to high school. It's closure, right? We need ritual, and we'll talk more about that. Other challenges are, for young people especially, they are looking to the adults in their lives in order to calibrate what level of seriousness do I take of these different things. Is COVID just a joke? Is it a conspiracy? Is it real? Can I die? Can I get it with no pre-existing health conditions? And the answer to that is yes. The answer to that is yes. A 19-year-old young man at my son's school who just graduated, no pre-existing conditions, died in a New Orleans hospital about a couple of weeks ago. It's very, very, very real. And for all the kids in that bubble, in that kid's bubble, and it even made national news, right? They were all traumatized by that. We've got the first day of school coming up. Just for those of you who are really nervous about that, we had that a week and a half ago here in Louisiana because we weren't a national hotspot and decided to just throw them all back into school. And most of the young people I know, and I've surveyed a lot of parents, they did great. They were ready to get back. It's a challenge. They've got to mask up. But they fared a lot better than I think a lot of folks thought they would. Now, it's still early in the game. The horse is just out of the gate. Like, we still have a few legs and turns to make. Lost dreams about college or senior year. Young person who had a partial scholarship, not a full scholarship, to a top 10 school in his major, or a top 20 school in his major, was going to pay the extra money to go to the top 10 school. But when he found, it was in California, but when he found out that it was going to be all online, it didn't make sense to pay an extra $60,000 to get an online education. And so that was a dream that he had worked for years. The other piece that's happening with young people, and I think we need to recognize it, whether they're directly or indirectly exposed to media and events through us, is mind mapping. And so amidst all of those challenges, this is some more of the deeper psychology and the more chronic trauma that we're seeing in young people, and it comes through mind mapping. And mind mapping is something that we've done since we were 2. Research shows that a 2-year-old can mind map their parents. At the age of 2, a kid knows whether their caregiver has good or ill intent toward them. At the age of 2, a kid knows, based on our research, and by our, I mean someone else's who I don't know, based on research, a kid knows whether or not, if they get a spanking or a punishment, whether or not that adult takes delight in administering that or not. And they can map that at the age of 2. Imagine what they can do by the age of 12, and by the age of 15, and by the age of 7, right? And so we can infer motivations, we can infer goodwill, contempt. It's such a part of our daily life, we take it for granted. Most people who are empaths or naturally empathic probably are very much in touch with this, although most people who are empaths also tend not to take care of themselves very well and are much more prone to burnout, but they read body language and they naturally do that. But everyone does it because the brain wall fires interpersonally. We're wired to affect and to be affected by other people. And this hits us in ways that we're not aware of, especially in traumatic mind mapping. And we kind of did a little bit of this at the very beginning. I didn't show many humans. I showed the wreckage, right? But if I had shown some pictures of human beings on September 11th and around it, and those are out there, right? You could have noticed, if I were measuring your neural activity and I were measuring your heart rate, I could also probably visually watch the difference of effect on you, seeing the wreckage versus seeing the people who were affected by it. And these are just a few images that we've seen. This was a picture taken not that far from you guys. We're masked up and we're burying people in freezer trucks. Like, most people have seen these images or heard about that we don't have enough room in the morgues to take care of the people who are dying from this. And we're watching these people who have to do it. And the first thing I saw, to the guy to the bottom left, I'm like, he must just have to go numb. Right? There's an old saying in our line of work, if you're the grave digger, you can't cry every time somebody dies. What's going through their mind? I mean, this is like a scene out of Bosnia. Like, this doesn't happen in the United States of America, but we're seeing these images. And I don't know all about you guys, and if you own a business, and we're all affected when businesses shut down, whether you're a patron and you can't go to your favorite business. But as a business owner, I can tell you that when we had to not see clients in person, and go virtual, 90% of my clients for 2.5 months didn't show up and didn't want to come to session. If it weren't for the Paycheck Protection Program, I might have gone bankrupt. It helped that I had COVID for a month of that and was in bed for a month. But when you see that and it's closed, and you start going, man, what's that like for people? Food banks straight. Now, this is something that we see 60 miles to the west of us right now in Lake Charles, an area that was decimated, and we were gratefully spared by Hurricane Laura last week. And so you've got people lining up for food. You've got people from my hometown right now, and who are, our local government won't open up shelters because our parish president decided that we don't have enough police force to have security, because he's making a political statement about the racial protesting that we have. And so we've got lines of cars from our town driving 60 miles out west to Lake Charles to go bring food and water, and help out the people there. But this is stuff I've seen a few times in my life, Hurricane Andrew, but we don't see this. This is happening in California. Look at that. I watched the murder of 2 innocent human beings on YouTube and on the news in the last 6 months, and I had never witnessed a murder or a killing in my life, and I watched it on television. That affects you. And I finally had to stop myself from watching it. Because then you're in denial, like that didn't just happen. Like surely he's going to get his knee off that man's neck. Surely these guys, and then when, we found out from after the Ahmaud Arbery situation that it was even worse than we thought at the beginning. It was just a good old-fashioned Georgia lynching. This is happening. Right. And what must it be like? I can't even imagine because I'm white, but what must it be like? Now look at this. These are probably all good people, but we've got a father and his daughter on his shoulders, and we've got people who risk their lives every day to protect us, who has a rubber bullet gun in this man's face. This is happening in our country. It's so, I've got chills in my body, and I've looked at this slide probably 50 times, 20 times just today. What might be going through each of these healthcare workers? God only knows what they're thinking. They might be thinking, is there going to be enough PPE for me to be able to do my job? I've never seen anything like it. And I've got friends who are physicians and who are nurses in the COVID wards, and they continue to say, I've never seen anything like this disease. It's horrific. And so what we have happening, not just because of the media, which would be primary or even, I guess you could say secondary, but we've got traumatic mind mapping, and we've got young people who are watching their parents' reactions. Now, as a good parent or somebody who tries to be a good parent, oh, sorry. Thank you all for that. Clarifying parishes in Louisiana that are counties. Sorry about that. Parents, we try to mask it, right? As parents, it's our job, the prefrontal cortex, to suppress emotion, and so that we're not a constant thoroughfare of information and of raw emotion for our kids to have to experience. Because we know that kids, they calibrate. Now, they do it less and less as they get older, but they calibrate their emotional response to events based upon their parents' response. And so as good parents, we know that we mask it, and we pretend that everything's going to be okay. Well, you can only do that for so long before the kids either eavesdrop or realize that the doo-doo is hitting the fan. Now, you could very well not know anyone for whom they are struggling. But I know 15 restaurants in my hometown, which is probably a fraction of the size of yours. We've got 80,000 people, 15 restaurants, and tourism and food is one of our, that are closed. that have been closed for 6 months. 8 of them are closed for good and won't reopen. I mean, it's just, you can't mask that. Abuse happens before the event and the mind mapping. That I just put that there to show that when someone or a child or anyone is being abused, sexual abuse or whatever age, that before the actual physical contact or the abuse happens, the intent of the abuser is actually abusive because of our ability to be able to mind map that. Moral disgust. And again, it doesn't matter what side of I know people who are on extremes of both political ends or all of the political spectrums, and they all experience moral disgust just for different reasons. I can't believe we're doing this. I can't believe we're not doing this. Causes memory, and again, I just put these there. So for those of you who are familiar with trauma, it does cause a trauma reaction. So in trauma, mind mapping. So here's the effects of repeated mind mapping and disgust reactions. More anxiety, more depression, more abnormal uncertainty. Uncertainty is a part of all of our lives, but we're experiencing a prolonged and extremely prolonged period of abnormal uncertainty, and that is affecting the psyche and it is affecting the soul. There are not enough psychological coping mechanisms to help some people get through this, and that's why I've always said I don't know how you get through it without faith. I just don't know how you get through it without the paradigm of faith. We're seeing anger, rage, a lot of irritability. Parents keep going, my kid's fused, they just lost it, right? It's because of that prolonged level of anxiety, of feelings of helplessness and despair, and of an inability to be able to affect the outcome of your environment. We all feel that, like I can't change it, right? I can paint the walls in this place, but I can't change the fact that 80% of my clients don't want to see me face to face. I can wear a mask, I can do everything right, but I can't change that. I can't change the fact that a friend of one of my clients at 19 years old died. Like I can't change that. We see a lot of sleep issues, especially for young people for whom they haven't had to go to school, right? And so their circadian rhythms are all off the whack. OCD type behaviors. Many people constantly have this feeling like they're treading water, and they're just uncertainty about letting things go. It's like, okay, Roy, all right, I might have to let go of the way I thought life was, but how much do I let go versus how much do I hold on to? And it's an incredible tension, and kids are facing the same thing. Like, all right, do I continue to hold out for football? I mean, are we going to play, or do I just let it go? If I just let it go and give up on it, people are going to call me a wimp. But am I really looking like a fool? Like, how much more can I work, and how much more time can I think about this and hope for it when it's increasingly looking like it's not going to happen in the fall? So what is trauma? And this will speak to one of the main areas of our role. Trauma is a deeply distressing and disturbing experience, right? And most of the time we think of it as an event. And we've called that in lines of work in schools, adverse childhood experiences, basically trauma. Every kid now has an adverse childhood experience. Every person now has, in America at least, has an adverse experience because of COVID. It did not discriminate. It's affected all of our lives, and it's affected kids. Trauma whose sudden impact and painful impact can't be placed within existing frameworks for meaning. Okay, my grandmother at 97 died. I've got a framework for meaning for that. And that framework is we don't live forever. I don't know many people who have lived past 100. 97 seems about right. It's sad, it breaks my heart, but I've got a framework for meaning for that. Not having graduation when I've never known anyone to not have a graduation ceremony, I don't have a framework for meaning in that. I don't have a framework for meaning that we've got to move our home because my parents lost their jobs because of COVID. I don't have a framework for meaning about that. I don't know what to do with the fact that my dad comes home every night and cries, and I've never seen my dad cry. Like, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with the fact that my dad's a physician at a local hospital, And he sat down and told us in early March that sooner or later, we're all going to know someone who got critically, if not died, from COVID-19. Don't know what to do with that. Trauma is experiencing a deeply disturbing experience in the absence of an empathic observer. This is where we can come in without being a psychologist, without being a mental health professional, right? We take two people, and if it were possible, theoretically it is, but not practically, to have two people with the same level of resilience experience a similar traumatic event, and it affects them both the same way. We put one of them through cognitive behavioral therapy, which focuses more on the thoughts, and we put the other one through emotionally focused therapy, which focuses on connecting with the client, being present to what the client is feeling and thinking. The one who goes through the emotionally focused therapy has far greater outcomes after the therapy is over than the one who goes through cognitive behavioral therapy. It's because when there is an empathic observer to our pain, we heal better. It's foundational for healing. The great philosopher, author Sue Monk Kidd, in her wonderful book, The Secret Life of Bees, has August Boatwright saying, something everybody needs is somebody important to them to see the pain and the hurt done to them and to set it down like it matters. It's what we all want, right? We want people, we want my friends in Lake Charles to know, hey, we care. We care. It was very comforting when Denise and Patty were like, hey, praying for you. I had to cancel the webinar last week. Your safety is the most important thing. We ended up not having to evacuate, but it was right up until the last minute. It's when we know people care about us and people see what's going on. You don't need a degree to do that. You don't have to be a psychologist or a minister to do that. Parents can do that. And I'm going to talk about, I'll talk specifically about how. That slide shouldn't be there. I want to get into, so what helps? So we're going to talk specifically about it. If I save these slides for the end, no one's going to listen. So I want to talk about, this is something we've always known for those of us who work with young people, and we tell parents, if it's not really healthy or good for the parents, then it's not good for the kid. And we saw that with a younger generation of parents who thought they constantly had to be with their kids, constantly, all the time, and they didn't go out on dates. They didn't take care of themselves. They never got a babysitter. All this because they're constantly surrounding the kid. And I was like, your relationship can't sustain that. And while this might look like it's good for the kid, and in your mind, getting a babysitter and going out on a date every week, you think is going to traumatize your kid, I'm here to tell you that if it's good for your relationship, it will be good for the kid because the kid needs you. And so as parents, as adults, we've got to be very keenly aware of how this is affecting us, because we are the primary resource for our young people in this. Because their friends, while they're the primary social support, their friends can't give them the relief, and they can't give them the support they need because they're really all in it together. Whereas very often, let's say you and your kid are having it out, your teenager are having it out, he goes to his friend, and maybe his parents are having it out, but maybe they're not. And that other kid can be there for the team. But right now, they're all in it together. And while they can support each other, they're basically all barely treading water in the same pool, trying to pat each other on the back. And so we as adults need to be there for them. And so we're balancing the tension of dangerously naive optimism. Everything's going to be okay. Everything, well, it should be gone by April, right? Dangerously naive optimism without becoming bitter, jaded, and cynical. Well, it's the end of the world. Well, it's probably somewhere in between. And that's exhausting. It burns calories holding that tension. Father John McNamara, in his definition of contemplative prayer, described it as a long, loving look at the real. My brothers and sisters, seeing the real was one of the requests that Jesus could not help but answer. Lord, I want to see. Boom. Whether it's physically in the scriptures or always spiritually. That prayer, I want to be able to see, and be careful what you pray for, because you're going to be able to see it. And you may not like what you see in yourself, and you may not like the real you see in others. And it's very often a mixed bag, which is why when people get too overly aligned with any political party, it's real clear to me, you clearly don't see. You don't see that both parties are a mixed bag, that it's not simple and easy on either side. This should be an anguishing decision for you. You're not seeing. You're only seeing part of it when you can see the whole, right? And so to be able to look at the real, what is real? What's going on? What's the real in the life of my kid? What's real in the life of the world? And that is especially distressing because that reality is changing more rapidly and consistently than ever before in most of our lives, with obviously some exceptions. Contemplative prayer, silence and solitude, allows us to be able to see through the fog. Journaling, sleep. Understand that while you might not be in a hospital caring for someone with COVID, you are experiencing secondary, if not tertiary stress through the stories you hear, depending on how close you are. Exercise, nutrition, healthy boundaries. And again, we're modeling all of these things for kids. Not everything that can be read, seen, and heard should be. I have put a severe limitation in the last probably month and a half on how much media I consume. Almost very little. I limit the amount of time I spend on Facebook, watching very little media because of the psychic overload from the traumatic mind mapping. My anxiety was going up, my depression, my irritability was all going up. And when I began limiting, now I don't have my head in the sand, but when picture and certainly video news, because of what in psychology we call the picture superiority effect, the brain doesn't have an opportunity to filter it out nearly as powerfully as it does words. I can hold the words out and decide what I want to digest, but when the pictures, especially video with sound, is coming at me, it's affecting me much faster than my ability to be able to screen it out. Verbal processing with other friends, with other parents, spiritual directors, and certainly now would be a time to get a counselor if you feel like that would be helpful. Okay, so post-traumatic growth is what we want to see in young people, right? Our old way of life is destroyed, at least partially, and life's demanding more sophisticated and a higher order response than we were previously capable of. That's that reintegration. From dying to resurrection, we're wanting to reintegrate. A priest friend of mine texted this to me, and this is his own words. The word change normally refers to new beginnings, but transformation, and the Greek word for that is metanoia, which is so often used in the New Testament to describe the type of being born anew, changing, and becoming a new person in Christ, metanoia. Transformation more often happens not when we get a new thing, or new opportunity, or new beginning, but when something old begins to fall apart. And that's what we have happening now. Our old way of life is falling apart. And we can use the word normal. I sure use it. But certainly God is inviting us all to something new. And it's tough. It's really tough. So what can we do in terms of that to help young people specifically? We're going to get vague to more specific. Help them understand age appropriately what's happening to them. Help them understand, and just I'm constantly doing it. I'm like, hold on. Let me step back and chronicle all the events that have happened and all you have on your plate, in addition to the stuff that you began coming to see me for that's happened over the last 6 months. Like, it's a lot. And oftentimes I'll write it out so that they can see it, or draw it on a timeline or a picture, some sort of visual example, so they can get it. And it's like, whoa, okay, all right. It makes you feel a little less crazy. Okay, I should be having a little bit of anxiety right now. Anxiety and a little bit of depression are normal reactions to the events of the day. So help them understand what's going on. Obviously, make that age appropriate. When people understand what's happening to them, they are more motivated and are able to protect themselves. How do we help young people? Well, we've got to understand it, understand how it affects them, and how much they need the village. It's calling on us to be very nimble. And this is something as Catholics and as church as a whole, we're not very good at, because we're so damn big and old. We're not nimble and flexible and adaptive are not three words that would be at the top of anyone's lexicon to describe the Catholic Church. We move with the speed of a canyon growing, but we have to be nimble, right? So counselors really got stuck for a while, and I did too. But I began starting to think outside of the box. I was like, I'm going to go meet at the park with kids. I've got to come up with a new declaration of practice, have parents sign a new waiver, understanding that we're going to be in HIPAA, the HIPAA regulations, letting them know that I can't guarantee privacy. Probably legally, probably not, straight away on that necessarily, I'm sure. But I got it all in writing, and the vast majority of them were like, oh God, y'all can go meet at a park. And that was great until the temperature got to be 100 degrees. And then we had to switch over again. And buy portable air conditionings outside and have like 7 fans blowing on us, and then we couldn't hear. So we have to be nimble. And so how do we anticipate and adapt to the changing circumstances? So as parents, what do we have to be nimble and be able to adapt to? Look, this is going to be like the prophet Isaiah right here. You're going to have to be able to adapt to school starting and ending, in person, back home virtual. In person, back home virtual. Season starting, oh crap, season over, season postponed, right? That's going to happen for the next year. And that's not, Roy, the sky is falling, even though my wife would argue that I am prone to hyperbole. That's the reality. It's already happening. It's already happening. It's one of the reasons my kids were in Catholic school, and my wife, who's been a virtual educator for 12 years, said they're not going to ride that roller coaster. We pulled them both. And we have them enrolled in K-12 when my wife's an administrator in K-12, so that they can have the consistency. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. I already see it happening based on the CDC regulations. And what do young people need? So what do they need in that? They sure as heck need a little more compassion from their teachers and administrators. And so if y'all know any of them and want them to be watching that, like, lighten up. Especially schools where there's uniforms. I heard something the other day, it made me literally want to bludgeon myself in the head with a sledgehammer. The Catholic school, well, the one that a local Catholic school. So after parents had already bought uniforms, right? That they buy them in like June, July, and I know some public schools have to buy uniforms. They get clothes, right? Well, and instead of saying, hey, we don't know when the hell school's going to start, we're going to have the start date. No one realistically believed it was going to start August 7th. We all knew better than that. So buy uniforms. Not only that, then they told them that they had to go and buy a school-approved colored mask. Oh my gosh. Seriously? Are you kidding me? And you wonder why people don't take us seriously? Focus on the steak and not on the peas. Like, it's not important. Right? Do you understand what's happening in the world? It's like you lost your keys in the house, but because there's light underneath the light pole in the street, that's where you're looking for your keys. We do that all the time. So be nimble. What do young people need? Young people need some flexibility. They need some understanding. They need us to understand that while getting into Harvard was the most important thing, that this kid not succumbing to an anxiety or a depressive disorder is a little bit more important than getting into a school that they most likely, probably statistically, were never going to get into anyway. And so, like, well, they always made straight A's and now they got 3 B's. Oh my love of God. What they need more than a 4.0 is a good work ethic. So what can we ask them? What can we talk to them about? So before, and I know you guys are starting next week, can say, which was smart, by the way, what's it going to be like when you got to wear a mask all day? And I might just ask that in a 2-minute conversation. Oh, I don't know. That's a big deal. And the kid's going to give you some, if it's an 8-year-old, they're going to go, oh, I don't know. And they're going to bite your ear off for like an hour. The teenager's going to be like, it may not even be understandable, some sort of a grunt. But here's what you can know, that they're going to be thinking about that. And so you've primed them. What's it going to be like, not being able to talk with your friends at lunch or whatever some of these specific regulations are going to be. So that's one way to help them help them mentally visualize. Don't sit down with them for an hour. My wife does this all the time. Like, oh, let's go have a 30-minute, heart to heart. My son is done at 30 seconds. I tell parents, set a timer on your watch for like 90 seconds and tell your kid that when that goes off, if I'm mid-sentence, about ready to give you the nuclear football codes, I am going to shut the hole under my nose, because what I want to say in that 90 seconds is so important. I want your undivided attention, right? And so here it is, boom, and then it's over. But I'm not going to have one of those a week. I'm going to have maybe 2 or 3 of those a day of 90 seconds. Hey, focus, I need 90 seconds. And the kid is going to lock in for 90 seconds to Roy, because Roy has kept his promise. Even when Roy really wanted to go 180 seconds or 100 seconds, I shut up at 90. So the micro conversation. Now, and then when they get back in school, hey, what was it like? How did that compare with what you thought it might be like? Again, teenagers are going to go like, oh, that's such a dad question. That's such a mom question, whatever. Great, but they're still thinking about it. Right? And don't get in that whole I told you so thing. I was just wondering, did it might be worse. And if so, let's hear about it. Like, I didn't think it was going to be this bad. All right, well, tell me about it. Remind them, and I do this all the time. I'm going to put a big sign up now that I own my office, big sign up in my office that says, better does not mean perfect. Hey, so are you getting better? Well, not really. What do you mean you're not getting better? You were having 4 panic attacks a day 2 weeks ago, and now you had 2 panic attacks this week. Of course, well, I'm still having panic attacks. I didn't ask you if a magic fairy came down and like spewed fairy dust on your head and made your whole life Clorox perfect. I asked you if you were better. And we all do that. Like, when we made progress, but because it's not fast enough, we don't recognize it. But if we were to recognize even slow, moderate progress, we feel better. We feel like, okay, I'm in control of it. I'm doing something. Life's getting better. God's on my side. Find out the kid's love language. This is so old, but it's so good. The love languages are so good, and they work on kids. Like, I'm a verbal person, and my oldest is a touch guy, and I can talk. I mean, my wife is a touch person. It's like manipulative how much she's a touch person. We can be arguing, and if I just go put my hand on her elbow, it's just like, oh, like it's bad. Like, it should be illegal. With kids, like, and look, again, I'm not going to go snuggle up with my 16-year-old, but I'm going to put my hand on his neck and go, hey, bud, how you doing? And touch him. And briefly, appropriately, in a way, words, gifts, obviously, service, quality time, acts of service. And again, you can find that out. You can have your kid take it. Kids and teenagers like to take this thing, by the way. I know it. Give it to them all the time. Explicitly connect young people to healing faith practices and stable, secure relationships, which means that while it may have happened, we may have to explicitly do it, to say, hey, did you pray your rosary today, or Divine Mercy Chaplet, right? Those devotions don't really do a whole lot for me, but they do well for ADHD kids who need something tactile to help them pray. And it's okay to do a decade, or it's okay to do a half of a decade. Anything is better than nothing. Well, if you don't do all 15 or 20 mysteries, come on. Devotion, silence, solitude, rituals are powerful, which is why it's even watching Mass on TV is so powerful, because they naturally heal rhythms. When we participate in the Paschal mystery at Mass and those rituals, it unconsciously tells us that just like Christ, we might be suffering and dying, but that resurrection is coming, if not now, at some point in the context of eternity. Track normalcy. What's one small thing that's beginning to get back to normal? Awesome, and validate that. Like, don't be a Debbie Downer on it. Well, just wait, blah, 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 blah. And I'm a little more jaded than most. I spent 12 years in a Catholic school as an educator. I know how kids are. I read the CDC guidelines. I don't give them a whole lot of time before half the school is at home on quarantine, unless the CDC changes its guidelines. Regardless of how, I know how much teachers get paid. But what's one thing that's normalizing? Awesome, I'm so glad that that's normalizing. Even if in the back of your head thinks, well, just wait, it's going to change. Be present, ask, listen, and reflect. And I'm going to send Denise the PDF of these slides as soon as we get done, so you guys will have them, can look over it. So right now, is it kind of like, I really just wish we didn't have to wear masks because it sucks. I like this formula. So right now, is it kind of like it's temporal, meaning it could be temporary and tentative. And it's just a passive suggestion to the kid that what they're going through right now, as crappy as it is, it's right now, and that it might change. So be present to them, ask, listen, and reflect. Keep it short. Keep coming back to check in. If the kid's sending signals that they want to talk for longer, then follow those signals. But if they're sending signals, right, I find keep it short, but keep it more frequent. Balance bringing up, hey, how you doing, with back to normal. And a lot of teachers and superintendents have been asking, hey, how should we get things back? I was like, so you need to give a hat nod to COVID, like a hat tip. Hey, how you doing? Okay, 5-10 minutes, great. Maybe the first day, let's talk about it. Ooh. Then things need to get back to normal with adjusted expectations. Because kids, we're all freaking tired of COVID. Like, we're exhausted by it. Like, let's talk physics. So the first time in my life, I would rather talk about physics than what's happening in the news and COVID. Like, please bludgeon me to death with the quadratic formula and math. Please, I love it. Let me diagram a sentence. For the love of God, don't talk about COVID. Keep them exercising. Novelty. So much has been the same. It's requiring a lot. This is a lot for parents. It's a lot for anybody. Keep them moving, exercising as much as possible. Sleep. Perhaps that is going to be on the top 3 biggest reasons kids need to get back in the building, because without it, or virtual schooling that required them to be live, they were going to stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning, and they were going to all be nocturnes. They can do that for a month or 2 over the summer. They can't do it for a year. Ask college freshmen who try that and who end up in the unemployment line. It just doesn't work. It affects their mood, and it's just rough. Gratitude practices. Again, no one wants to do it. And if you do, great. You're one of the few people who really, I can't wait till the evening to think about 3 things I'm grateful for. That's awesome. I'm not, but I do it because it makes me a more positive and grateful person. So I saved a few minutes for questions despite a late start. And again, this contact info is going to be in the PDF. And there's a couple of podcasts on COVID, but the podcast has been dormant for the last few months, but we're about to kick it back up again. There's 100 and something episodes for parents and youth ministers. All right, and that's it. I'm going to stop sharing.